Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our concepts edition for the week, where we go over kind of theory and big picture concepts. I am Devin Bedoni.
And I'm Uriel Eisen.
I'm going to hit the quote.
I'll give you a piece of advice, sir. Make use of the tool that is to hand. A quote from Childemas in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. This quote pops into my head from time to time because I think it's very easy to put off experiments by sort of saying like, oh, we need this tool to do that. And then often, and this was in Designing the Future as well, some examples of robotics companies that do very complex, like deep sea robotic manipulators, where the founder basically, like, the company started losing money, and the founder came back to like when he was in charge of R&D, and the premise was basically like, if the world was going to end tomorrow, what can you build this second to test some aspect of this concept? And so, like, making a cardboard robotic arm, they found out that like their hose routing wouldn't work. Right. And they could have gone, and everyone was happy with the design, but it was like him being like, no, we're going to build something now to move the needle in terms of testing and de-risking. What can we use? Like, obviously we're not going to machine this out of whatever, aluminum, titanium, like whatever they make them out of. We just need something. What do we have?
We need the knowledge. We don't need the thing.
Yeah, but I just feel like in the shop, it's also easy. Like, I feel like as my machines get more advanced, it's easy to forget to go back to basics of like, we need a shelf. There is a board there. I don't have a shelf bracket, so I could order one, or I could just use a piece of wire at an angle and put a screw in, and it's under tension, and that's going to be really strong. And I have wire. So like, let's just get a shelf up, and then we can fix the bracket if that's annoying. Anyway, so I go back to this quote sometimes.
Interesting. Yeah. I honestly don't know what to think about it, but I like it. It makes me giggle.
Yeah.
So you have a problem. Maybe we have a problem, but you stated it well. You want to lead us off?
Yeah. So I've been struggling with a feeling in the shop. Like, we tried to get into the shop in the morning and start the day with improvements.
You start the day with improvements?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Right in the morning.
At one point, weren't you getting the things rolling and then doing improvements kind of like early afternoon?
I don't know. I think we used to try to get things rolling and it never worked. So now we like get the machines warming up, but that's kind of it. Also, if Sam gets there before me, he'll get production going.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we get there in the morning and start doing improvements, and it feels lately like that is a big distraction from what the company needs to grow and succeed. And obviously that is sort of antithetical to this podcast. And so, and then I also recognize
heresy.
Yeah, but I recognize also that that maybe we're just not improving the bottlenecks. And so I've been trying to push the focus onto the things that I'm actually like that are taking my time. And then so that's kind of the struggle, I think.
Well, you stated something good a moment ago before we started recording, that all of the examples that we see are production examples for the most part. Yeah. I think that's key. And
like all the literature is all about Toyota and manufacturing cars, and then the other examples are often manufacturing with the occasional sort of software example, I would say.
Yeah.
And then also I've hired Sam. He does most of our production. And so in terms of leading a group effort around building a culture of continuous improvement, it's much easier to get into the shop and talk about things that are common to everyone, which is production.
Yes.
And so we end up focusing on production improvements, even though for the last probably 8 months, we're not production limited.
Yeah.
But you can see the issues with production easily, and all the tools are easily applied to production. But it's just more and more clear that that is I don't know if it's a bad use of time. Like it does build the confidence to go after bigger customers for sure.
Yeah.
But it's just like, it really feels like a distraction from what I know the company needs to grow.
Mm-hmm. I've been having similar but different struggles. Sort of like feeling like we're in the thick of it. I know, in my head that in the long run it will help.
Yeah.
But it feels aimless a little bit. It feels like we don't have a direction for just saying like improve stuff is really hard to justify when there's like parts that need to be made that will make money. And so I've been also struggling with this, like how do we align sort of around a common purpose? Mm-hmm. And we have talked on the podcast quite a bit about how that's kind of where theory of constraints wins out over TPS at times. Like so much of what you read about TPS, it feels like you just like lay an improvement blanket on everything, right? It's just like go improve. And in a labor limited business that feels very challenging. Mm-hmm. And I think what I'm sort of starting to see is that I think that's how it's described a lot. I don't think that's actually how it's done.
Interesting.
And reading this Toyota Kata book has sort of brought it home that I think the target condition process, and it's funny kind of like thinking back through the last 9 months of this podcast, like it's taken us this long and will probably continue to take a very long time for us to really kind of drill into the details and the actual functioning of this whole thing. It'll probably be a lifetime process. Yeah. But it's funny looking back and realizing that like it's like improve what bugs you leads to a shop in which there is some clarity to see things. And then the A3 process, which we still don't really do, can lead you to the target condition, and then the target condition leads you to actually improving what matters in your business. And I think that's kind of like, I don't know, I feel like a blind person fumbling through the woods a little bit here, but that feels very key at this point and I think it will be extremely key in aligning our crew in the business, because it's very easy to say improve things, and they're smart,
right?
They're like, this does not seem important, right?
Like
I can clean, but like give me some direction. Mm-hmm. And I think that the target condition concept fills that void a bit. And
I think that's a good point. I think like coming up with real is the wrong word, but like the big blockers to the business performing at a different level. Yeah. I think, it's way easier for me to sort of see that for you than it is for me, I would say. Like, I think sort of you recently started talking about like a goal of reducing setups. Yeah. And it's like, that seems essential to you sort of breaking through to a different way of operating a job shop. Mm-hmm. Right. Like for me, it's useful for a very different reason, I think. Yeah. Reduced setup times. But so I don't know. I think the struggle for me is sort of twofold. It's for sure that of like taking the time to establish, to think through and get some clarity around like what are the really important things that we do that need to be improved, or like what do we need to get to as a business to be able to perform better. And maybe that's around, thinking out loud here, maybe that is around developing new products and releasing them in a certain time frame. Maybe
doesn't that still fits in with this concept, right?
Of target conditions. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm just trying to come up with some
that apply.
But I think that the second piece that I'm struggling with is like production related versus not production related, and then how hiring, this is relevant across the board. I've been having some great conversations with Joe about over at Cobra about sort of maintaining clarity that like hiring people shouldn't distract you as the business owner from the tasks you really need to accomplish. And it's so easy to try to make sure an employee isn't idle. And then that pulls you into like coming up with projects.
Yeah.
Instead of just being like, okay, you're idle, that's fine. Like you're, like you said, you're smart.
Yeah.
Like figure out something useful to do or learn, or I don't know. But like, so that's sort of the other piece, is just the production related improvements I think are really not important to our business.
To your business.
To my business right
this
now.
Moment. Yeah.
Not to say that everyone we do isn't useful, but it's not improving the bottleneck at all.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my brother about, he was sort of saying like going back to answering questions and de-risking concepts. I think when I started this business, I was de-risking the idea of, we've talked about this, but like in startups, there's like 3 risks. There's market risk, tech risk, and team risk. So at the beginning, it was sort of like market risk. Well, no. First, it was tech risk. Can I make a better buckle?
Yeah.
Then it was tech market risk. Will people buy it for the price that I need to charge? And now it is sort of team risk of like getting the right people in place and getting to that stage and like getting revenue to support a bigger team and all that. So
yeah,
it has nothing to do with manufacturing. Like, to be clear, though, all of the improvements we've made to manufacturing is the reason. It has nothing to do with manufacturing. So
you have de-risked that portion, at least so far.
Yeah, and it runs
continuous improvement
very well and all that. Anyway.
So to wrap that up, maybe, it seems like if you also, not you, Uriel, but you, the listener, are struggling with this concept of like, where do we put our time and energy trying to improve things? This seems silly. I think this is like some research towards the target condition concept and how to apply it.
Yeah.
Which, like, I guess just to explain this, I'm no expert at all, but I think my understanding is that effectively you say, you set a target that is not constrained by your current state, maybe. So we very commonly, and we were working on our shipping station yesterday in our new space, and after we had this whole discussion, and it was kind of like, well, how do we use this bench and where do we put this computer? And I think afterwards I was like driving to Home Depot to buy a bench and thinking about kind of like the way that conversation flowed, and it was very backwards, I think, from this concept, but I think very much in our nature, where right now we often start with our constraints, and then we figure out how to work within our constraints to get something slightly better. Whereas I think the target condition is to say, this is our current state. They are not necessarily constraints. They're not limiting constraints. This is our current state. Our target condition is this. You're telling me it's not possible to get from here to there, so figure out what needs to change to make it possible. Which is a very different way of thinking than I think we currently do, most of us.
And this gets to another sort of contradiction, I guess, because the quote at the beginning of this episode was use the tool that is to hand, which is very much like embrace your constraints in a funny way.
Yeah.
But then I guess the goal is to kind of use those for quick learning cycles.
Yeah.
But I think, maybe a big piece that's missing is sort of setting those target conditions. And I like what you said there. We're like treating those exercises sort of separately and making time for both. Where one is kind of like, where do we want to be as a business? Okay, that's the target condition.
Yeah.
And I think it was in Toyota Kata where they were talking about setting good target conditions. They shouldn't, like, setting good goals for people that are exciting to achieve. If it's immediately obvious how to achieve it, it's not that interesting, right? And if it's completely impossible, it's also not interesting.
Yeah.
And so you need sort of a balance where you have a target condition that seems very difficult. It seems like a challenge to come up with good target conditions.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. I think you're right that it is not in our nature to think that way, or maybe it's not like in our nurture to think that way. I don't really know.
No, I think you're right. I think we are, as a rule, taught to figure out how to function as well as possible within the constraints that we find ourselves in.
I think there's that. I think there's also this idea of like, and I don't know where this comes from, but if you are trying to not fail, setting up target conditions that are not immediately obvious how you're going to achieve them seems like a great way to fail.
Yeah.
And so I think like I've worked at places,
and especially as an individual, like it's different when a whole team is assigned a very hard project and you have support from, I guess I'm thinking back to school again, right? Mm-hmm. Like and that story you told a long time about like making the different, what was it, a rocket or something? Making the very different rocket, right? Like you were disincentivized from that sort of mode.
Very much so, right.
Whereas if the goal of the class set forth by the teacher with support had been come up with a new way to make a rocket, it's got to do this and this.
Yeah.
And you're all going to work on it as a team. Like it would have been an extremely different outcome. So it's like we are very much pushed not to think in this way.
Yeah, and like I've worked on teams where it seemed like a big part of the work was coming up with ways of evaluating the project such that they looked very successful. Which made sense in a greater context of like it's hard to come up with metrics to measure teams, and the bigger an organization gets, the easier it is to lean on crappy metrics.
Yeah.
And I think it is Eliyahu Goldratt that says metrics need to be in total alignment to positive outcomes for the business.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, so it's easy to get away from that. But yeah, I think setting target conditions, maybe you're right, is kind of the I don't know, it's sort of like creating a lighthouse in a funny way. Or I guess you don't aim for a lighthouse, so that's a bad analogy. But like right, like fumbling, you mentioned like fumbling around in the woods.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, here's a good one, I guess. When you're orienteering, like the first thing they teach you, I feel like, is,
for anyone who doesn't know, that's finding your way with a map and compass.
Oh yeah. The first thing I learned
compass,
anyway is you have the compass, but if you just like look down at the compass and walk, that is not a good way to navigate because you're going to hit all these obstacles. And so then you go a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right, and then you have to go around a hill instead of straight over the hill. And you just don't end up traveling like due north.
Yeah.
Instead, you have to find a high spot and like take a sighting with your compass, find a big landmark that is due north from you, and then hike toward that.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe that's sort of the analogy, is if you just look down at the compass and say like, let's improve, you're just wandering quite a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right that target conditions are sort of the missing piece here.
It felt like a bit of an aha moment reading this last week. And I've been reading the book for like a month or two. Yeah. And it took me this long to be kind of like, oh,
this is the common theme that we are totally missing. Yeah, which kind of brings me back to like how to get into lean.
Yeah.
Or how to... because it seems essential to, I don't think if someone had said, okay, yeah, your problem is not having target conditions, I don't think that would have been very helpful to me. Because there's a few factors. One is like you've mentioned a few times, like having a chaotic system it's very hard to improve with just general chaos.
Yeah.
And so the 2 second improvements, like fix what bugs you, just like tiny little things, get organized, get clean, get like all that stuff is super helpful to then go like, wow, our process sucks, you know, or like, and it is very actionable. Like I can tell when I go into the shop and every day I have to like bend over to pick up a dustpan and the dustpan is always falling over or is somewhere else because it doesn't really have a home. That is a really easy place to step into things. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure that it's like, don't do that. But I will say every big improvement we've made that I like looking back, everything that I kind of go like, wow, that was transformational, was not little stuff. It was the big structural things. And like Shigeo Shingo says, improve your process, don't improve your operations first, right? You first focus on the process. I think that's the difference. It's like fix what bugs you. You're often going to fix operations.
Yeah.
And it takes some stepping back and like looking, at an overview.
Right.
To go like for a long time on this podcast, I was struggling with how to improve our deburring.
Tumbling.
Our tumbling. And then with a little push from Mr. White, it's like, wait, we don't need to tumble, you know? So.
Yeah. Hopefully that was helpful.
I mean, yeah, what like coming away from this for you, what are you going to do you think?
I want to start having more of these discussions with my crew, essentially. It's a little hard being, so deep into this conversation and thinking, like with you and with our listenership and the people that we like to nerd out about this with. And having only had a small amount of this conversation with the people I actually work with every day. And I'm trying to figure out how to kind of like bridge that gap effectively without just having all these conversations over again, which might be what needs to happen to some extent. But I think these key concepts, I think the target condition concept, I think will be very helpful for them.
I do suspect that that it will be very useful for the organization to have just a little bit more direction. Because I know in our shop, it sort of feels like we're all over the place and it's like, wow, there's so many things to improve.
Yeah.
And we do a little of this and a little of that. And they're all, I don't know, sort of useful.
Yeah. So I think that's where we're going to start is just sort of like using it to create a context for the discussion and context for where we put our energy. I think an overarching goal of like maybe a financial target that we share is, I think, will be helpful, not as a functional target, but just as like an alignment of purpose target.
Interesting. That feels very antithetical to.
It does.
A lot of.
I think it's sort of just bringing them into the thinking about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
A little bit and the scale of what we're trying to achieve. Because it's very easy to, I think, especially as an employee, to just get a little bit lost in the day to day. And it being like, this is what we're working for. We're going to try and make this much money next year. We know it may not happen, but this is sort of the scale that we're working on. I think will help bring a sense of seriousness to it.
Interesting.
And then within that kind of like, stretch goal or whatever kind of target, then start to make actual target conditions that are more related to what we actually do on a daily basis. If that makes sense.
It does. It seems hard to jump from one to the other without a lot of conversations of saying like, it seems like a lot of steps to go from a target revenue. Well, I don't know if you do revenue or profit.
This would probably just be a revenue number, but
yeah.
I don't think we're
like down to, okay, we need to improve our setups or, I mean, that is really interesting. And I feel like if you saw the total, like the connections between all those,
yeah,
I think it would be much more motivating or something like, oh, I totally understand why we're working hard on improving our setup times.
Yeah. Maybe I'm not thinking about this in a good way, but I thought that would be a simple way to get kind of the team on board with, with why this matters, basically. And then when you loop that back to the specific things, why those, like what kind of needle we're trying to push.
Yeah, I think
instead of just being like, we're doing this because we want to be better.
Right.
Because we want to do more.
Because Toyota did it.
Because Toyota did it.
Yeah.
It's going to be like, no, because I want to pay you guys more. This is what we have to do to pay you guys more.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think I am a little suspicious of like revenue targets, because I've seen for myself in this business that having specific revenue goals, I think, has sort of actually like hurt me in some ways. In some ways it's been good. In the ways it's, I think, hurt me a little bit is that the quickest way for me to increase revenue is through sales. But the biggest impact to the business long term is actually going to be product development. And so that ends up pulling me off of product development when I sort of look at the numbers and look what I can pay myself and go like, man, I would love to pay myself more.
Yeah.
Let me push a little harder on growing into a new market, on, you know, doing more influencer stuff, you know, whatever it is. So I think maybe that's more linear for you between like a revenue target and the direction the company needs to move.
I think it is. And I think we have a little bit more of like it's not this cut and dry, but it's a little easier to say we have this number of machines, you know, like we're a little more, maybe we're not more, but it's easy for us to do some simple math and say we have this number of machines. We have this theoretical number of billable hours in the year. According to those numbers,
interesting,
we should be able to hit this target.
Right.
We're not.
Why?
Let's fill those gaps, basically.
And then why again and again?
Yeah. So maybe it's not so much of a target as like I think it is. It's
target. Like a stepping in point, sort of.
It's a comparison.
Yeah.
It's a point to compare against.
Yeah.
And it is like I wouldn't mind making more money. So. Yeah.
Completely.
It's not the underlying. Well, no, it is sort of the underlying goal, but profit would be the underlying goal. So
right.
We don't want to do
revenue is the easy number.
Yeah.
To aim for.
It is. Anyhow, that's what I'm thinking of in this moment.
Interesting. Yeah. My feeling is that I need to give more time to discussing with the team what our challenges are, and spend more time and effort on the process of picking out a target condition. And like moving away from like, we get into the shop, we have this whiteboard full of ideas of things to improve, and then what are you working on today? What am I working on today?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. Right. Yeah. And that feels good because, you know, I can post about that on Instagram. We can talk about it on the podcast. Like, oh, we screwed this thing to the wall. Right. Like, but I think it's clear. I think those things are useful in building awareness of waste. And that's an essential part of this puzzle. Like, I'm not sure that having those conversations with people who have not spent some time improving things and taking the time to notice and being through it a few times to see how impactful it can be. Yeah. Like, my feeling is like, and I think I mentioned this, but it seems from the outside like Sam totally got it once he got this sewing machine reprogrammed. Yeah. Because it's something he does every day a lot. And now it is a lot better after spending, I don't know, 6 weeks working on getting it to do that. Yeah. And without that buy-in, I think it would be hard to sort of, I think it would feel pretty pointless to sit there discussing like, where do we want to be and how, and ask 5 whys. And it might feel a little, you know, just like a lot of meetings. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I definitely struggle with the fact that our process still looks very kind of like muddy. Mm-hmm. The process of your business or the process of improvements or both? Well, definitely the latter, but the business. Yeah. And asking what kind of challenges we're having with our production process. I think my crew often struggles feeling like, well, today it was this, but tomorrow we're going to be doing something different. So, and sort of getting them to a point of seeing the through line is a nut I'm still trying to crack. Like, I think they understand pretty well. Like, you know, we order stock, we cut it, we program it, we put it in the machine, and like that's what we do. Right. But getting to the point where they see that as the process
and
Yeah.
not the minutia of each job.
Right.
Is a trick.
And I guess that's where categorization comes in a bit, right?
Uh-huh.
Like we sort of talk about like what lean waste does that improve or does that, eliminate?
Yeah.
And it feels a little bit artificial to try to shoehorn things into that. But on the same token, I think like thinking back to applying lean to a job shop, I think there was, just categorizing the product differently allowed for the idea of like subsequent checks to be a thing that is applicable. And, in-station quality, you suddenly see, in-station quality is huge in a job shop.
Yeah.
And it's not in terms of like, I passed this part with a burr. It's more like I passed this program with a crash.
Yeah.
Right? Or like I gave a quote to the customer that was too low or any of those things. So like, yes, it is shoehorning a thing into something it doesn't fully belong in, but like I think that categorization helps see the through line.
Yeah. I think I need to like literally map this as a group on a whiteboard. And I think we need to kind of like map our physical material flow and map our information flow.
Interesting.
And kind of go through it together so that we're all on the same page about what
and
it
maybe
is.
Draw loops that go back when processes don't run and have to get passed back for rework.
Yeah.
I'd imagine that would be a big one. Maybe not.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's a trick.
That seemed a little aimless, but I think also useful.
Yeah.
Maybe
I've
a bit of a refocusing.
Yeah. I've got a couple little tidbits in here that I had in last week, but we didn't get a chance to talk about.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're big discussion points, but I thought I would just share them because they're cool. All from Toyota Kata. One good quote was, "Offshoring is just making waste cheaper instead of reducing waste."
Interesting.
This kind of gave me hope, I guess, as an American manufacturer.
I could see that.
Because it's sort of, and Toyota's sort of a good example. Like they're not in a cheap country to operate.
Right.
I know they produce cars all over the world, but, this kind of makes it makes you at least have some hope that like if you work to reduce your waste, you can still be competitive. And I think you absolutely can. So that was a cool quote. Focus on cycle time reduces value add percentage without reducing total yield time if overall system efficiency Lordy, is not tackled.
Focus on cycle time reduces value add percentage without reducing total yield time if overall system efficiency is not tackled.
So basically this is saying like if you focus on your operations and not your process, you don't, this comes back to theory of constraints.
Yeah.
You don't have any further throughput. You're actually just doing less percentage of the time that something spends in your building.
Yeah.
You're adding value to it. It's like sitting there more.
Right.
It's kind of an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah. I've like recently when people sort of ask about lean, cause I have this conversation not super regularly.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that I talk about, because I think it just makes you think a little bit, is that people self-report 85% of their job is value add. But in audits, it tends to be the other way where it's 15% of your job is value add. And so focusing on the value add portion of your day and improving that is tempting, but definitely misguided. And there's a lot more available improvements, often for a lot less money, in other things.
Yeah.
I got my wisdom teeth out 2 days ago, and the office where I got it done was such a great example of this. They were so disorganized in a lot of basic ways that I could definitely help them with, knowing very little about dentistry or any, the medical side of things. It was just like basic things like the keyboard had nowhere to be. And so everyone who came into the room, and there were like 5 people who came into the room who had to do different things with me.
Yeah.
Of like, sign this consent form. Okay, now let's go through your health history, and now let's have you pay us money. Right. Every person who came to the room was sort of like looking for the keyboard, figuring out where to prop it so they could type, and then like where the anyway. So it's all those things, and I would guess that there's a lot of focus on how long does this procedure take, and what are the materials we're using, and how much should we bill for it, and all that, and a lot less on the total system.
Interesting. This is not a quote from Toyota Way or Toyota Kata, but moving sucks.
Yeah, you just had a big move.
Yeah. My little note that I stuck in here was, I'm all for optimization and trying things out, but disruption is something to be taken seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, obviously, when you do little improvements, the disruptions are small. But I think it's important to still take that into account with everything you do.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, I think coming back to Toyota Kata, like the small, easily testable improvements, I think that's pretty key.
Yeah.
For minimizing disruption. And like having this giant disruption just kind of like brought that home. Like this costs a lot.
Right.
It's like a monetary toll. It's an emotional toll on everybody involved.
Yeah.
Like disruption is really, really, really challenging. And one last one was about leveling Heijunka. The underlying goal of Heijunka is to establish a regular pattern that can be a target condition to compare against. So
interesting.
Like there's a lot of focus in all of the lean books about Heijunka as a goal unto itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of companies being like, well, we can't level because of this, because of that. So we're switching back to this other system where we schedule or whatever. And then coming back to this, like, no, it's not the goal unto itself. It is a target that when you see that you can't achieve it, it's a lens for finding out why you couldn't achieve it.
Interesting. So I'm rereading the Toyota production system.
Yeah.
And I was just last night listening to the portion on production leveling.
Yeah.
And like the history of it, which is so interesting being a supplier to other people. I'm sure you see this, and I see this a lot. Is the way everyone thinks is they place a PO with a certain delivery date, and then you hand all the stuff over.
Yeah.
But if you think about that, so the issue Toyota was having is they'd place these orders, their vendors would work on it all month and then deliver it at the end of the month, which meant that they couldn't actually ship anything until the end of the month when they had everything in.
Yeah.
And so they were getting these crazy spikes where everything would be done at the end and shippable at the end of the month, and they have like all these chassis sitting around that can't be shipped.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of what led them to this realization. But that's an interesting additional point of like, why can't you level production as a baseline for finding new problems or new issues to solve.
Yeah. Basically it was like, you'll never achieve it. Right. But this is the lens to see where you can't achieve it.
Interesting.
And fix those issues.
Yeah, I also, and I'm going to reread this section, I also got to the part about how Toyota plans their production like a month ahead of time. Well, a year ahead of time, and then month by month more granularly, but then never releases the data to every station. They only release it to the final assembly line so that, and this is really interesting, and I was trying to think how I would actually implement this in our shop. You get the production leveling of saying this is approximately what we're going to produce every day. Mm-hmm. But then you get the micro adjustments of like, we thought it would be 6 of this car and 4 of this car, but it's actually 4 of this car and 6 of the other one. And you don't have to take any time to propagate to get that information out to every station, right? They just don't trigger the Kanban. And so you don't, what was happening before is that they would create a schedule, everyone would work to that schedule, and then the people in the warehouse say, oh, whoa, we have a lot of these cars that haven't gone out. And then you'll see like a 30 or 40% reduction in production called for.
Yeah.
Instead of just like a 1 or 2% or 5, it's this huge step where everyone says, okay, big change of plans here because this thing sold more than we thought and this thing sold less than we thought.
Yeah.
And so they have a very interesting mix of really in-depth production planning.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre for the purpose of, hey, Junka, production leveling mixed with
a pull system.
Yeah, I guess.
Huh.
Yeah, kind of interesting.
That's very curious. I'm not really sure how we can apply this lens in a job shop.
I was going to say that, yeah.
It's probably going to be another 6 months before I even have a concept, but I think it's a cool concept to think about because it should be applicable. It's a broad concept. It should be applicable.
Yeah, and I think there's different time scales to look at it in, right? Like, I could totally see if you got into like this month to month or week to week, like quoting people, oh, that'll be 2 weeks, or I could imagine toward the end of the week it being like, okay, everything needs to ship by Friday.
Yeah.
And that already pushes you away from production leveling or, I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Anyhow,
tricky.
Couple tidbits out of the books.
Yeah.
I think that'll do us for the week, or for the day, rather, for the episode. Thanks all for listening, as always. And please send us feedback, as always. We've been slowly, sort of amorphously changing our format since we began.
Yep.
If anybody has thoughts about that, we'd love to hear them. We're always sort of, we're a little, maybe we need to set ourselves a target condition, but we're a little bit fumbling in the dark here. But it seems like everyone enjoys it so far.
Everyone who listens.
Yeah, maybe they're laughing. Oh, look at them fumbling. You can find me on the internet at likenprecision.com and lichen_MFG on Instagram.
And you can find me at austeremfg.com on the internet and austere_manufacturing on Instagram, and the podcast at incremental CI on Instagram.
And we have a Patreon.
We do indeed. Please check it out. There's a lurker tier at $1 a month, which comes out to $12 a year.
You're good at math.
Thank you. If you feel that this delivers that amount of value, hop over there and, become a member. Anyway.
Yes.
Till Friday.
Adios.